All right. Hello to everyone who is joining alive here. I'm just starting up a few things. And good evening. All right. If you're in the comment thread, have a blast. Feel free to chime in with questions along the way. Den is here who's helping out with moderation. He'll sign any comments with his name on them. So feel free to leave your questions and comments as we go along here. I got a couple quick housekeeping things. As always, you can support the channel. Go to patreon.com/Hemant. That's down there. I appreciate that. You can leave a super chat, and we'll definitely get to your question in between stories. So that's also appreciated. And next week, one of the things that happened last week that I did not get to cover yet was Katie Britt's response, Senator Katie Britt's response to the State of the Union. And the reason that might be relevant here is because after her speech that got mocked on Saturday Night Live and all that, there was a lot of discussion about her weird, awkward, performative voice was very reminiscent of something a lot of fundamentalist Christian women have learned to speak with. It's called the fundy baby voice. And someone who captured that really quickly after she gave it, I'm going to show you here, is Jess Piper. She wrote a wonderful article about the fundy baby voice. And I'm going to be talking to her specifically on Monday morning. And like I do all the time, it'll be live streamed on this channel, but I'll also post clips of it later for anyone interested. So just putting that out there. I don't know who's available on a Monday morning, but there you go. So let's get started. There's so many stories to get to. I figured we would start with this headline that I saw this week. A Wisconsin ruling on Catholic charities raises the bar for religious tax exemptions. And there's so much going on there that I don't know if the specifics of this case made it through to you, even if you saw a headline like that. So I wanted to discuss what this case was all about, what the Supreme Court's decision was in Wisconsin, and why this is actually a big deal. Because what they said is that a nonprofit organization doesn't get out of paying taxes or a certain type of tax just because they say, hey, we're religious, so we don't have to do it. Okay. And it was a 4-3 decision. It was close. But if you followed anything about Wisconsin politics, you know that last year they had a huge they had a huge campaign to see if a liberal justice could win that seat. She did. And that's the reason Wisconsin just got rid of its legislative gerrymanders. Huge decision. And this is another 4-3 case where the liberals outnumbered the conservatives on the court. So, like, elections matter. But let's get to the specifics about what this case was about. What it involved is something called the Wisconsin Unemployment Compensation Act. Okay, big words, big name, doesn't matter. But basically, employers across the state of Wisconsin are required to give money to the government. They got to pay taxes, specifically to help pay for citizens to get their temporary benefits when they're unemployed. You know, people who are out of work and file for unemployment benefits. Where does that money come from? It comes from these taxes that groups, organizations, companies have to pay. But in 1972, religious nonprofits were declared exempt from that law. They did not have to pay into the system. So if you're a church, you don't have to give money to unemployment taxes. And basically, what the law said is that nonprofits that are run by a church or ministry, religious organization, and that operate primarily for religious purposes, those 4 words you should remember, they don't have to pay into the system. So last year, there was an appellate court that said the Catholic Charities Bureau, along with 4 of its sub-entities that it oversees, were not eligible for that exemption. They were not religious organizations specifically. And like no one doubts that they're run by the Catholic Diocese of Superior in Wisconsin, but there was disagreement over whether their work was inherently religious. For example, the groups that are overseen by Catholic Charities, the one we're talking about, they did work like helping people get placed into jobs. They helped people they helped feed the hungry. They helped people with developmental disabilities. And all of those are incredible things. I'm so glad those organizations are there to help with those causes. That's wonderful. But the question is, are those religious organizations? Because what the Catholic Charities Bureau was saying is that their desire to help the poor and disadvantaged was an extension of their faith. But helping the poor and disadvantaged is not inherently religious. You know what I mean? Just because you say, yeah, we're motivated to do that because of God. Well, that's nice, but no one cares what your motivation is. The work you're doing is not religious in any way. You're just trying to help people, and that's great. Like all those services are technically secular in nature. Just because they're overseen by the Catholic Church doesn't mean they're working to advance Catholicism. And if they're not actively and directly promoting their faith, this is what the lower courts were saying. If they're not promoting their faith specifically, why should they get a tax exemption meant to benefit religious organizations? And the funny thing is, for decades, the Catholic Charities Bureau paid the unemployment tax. Why? Because they said their work was charitable, educational, and rehabilitative. It was not religious. Only in 2015 did they try to apply for the religious exemption, and they got rejected. And then over the next several years, you start seeing this back and forth because that decision gets reversed. Then it gets reversed again. Then they go to the courts, and one court says they're religious. The appellate court says they're not religious. So this is why this case made it up to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And when they considered the case, they basically arrived at the same conclusion. All right. So check this out. I'm going to show you a bit from this decision, from the majority's decision here. The Court of Appeals concluded that for an employee's services to be exempt from unemployment tax, the organization must not only have a religious motivation, but the services provided, its activities, must also be primarily religious in nature. Okay, so this is what we're talking about. They're trying to figure out, can we look at these organizations, even if they're under an umbrella run by the Catholic Church, are these organizations specifically religious? And it didn't look like they were. Let me show you another thing here. Check out this excerpt from their decision. The record demonstrates that Catholic Charities Bureau and the sub-entities, the four groups that they were representing, which are organized as separate corporations apart from the church itself, neither attempt to imbue program participants with the Catholic faith. They're not shoving their faith on the people they're helping, nor supply any religious materials to program participants or employees. So they're not proselytizing, which again, that's good. They shouldn't. Although not required, those would be strong indications that the activities are primarily religious in nature. But let's go on here. CCB's and the sub-entities' activities are primarily charitable and secular. The sub-entities provide services to individuals with developmental and mental health disabilities. These activities include job training, placement, coaching, as well as services related to activities of daily living. CCB provides background support and management services for these activities, a wholly secular endeavor. You get where this is going here. Such services can be provided by organizations of either religious or secular motivations, and the services provided would not differ in any sense. You get where this is going. Everything these organizations are doing, you could say, oh, an atheist group happened to do them, and they would look exactly the same, because there's nothing inherently Catholic about helping the poor. So the question is, are those organizations, can they just say, well, we're Catholic, so we don't have to pay the taxes? Well, the court's saying, I'm looking at everything you're doing. There's nothing Catholic about you. Helping the poor is not just a Catholic thing. And so this keeps going on for a while here until finally they said, we conclude. Let me see if I can find this here. Maybe I can't. Maybe it's a little lower here. Um, Here we go. This is the part I want to show you. Although CCB and the sub-entities assert a religious motivation behind their work, the statutory language indicates this is not enough to receive the exemption, right? An objective examination of the actual activities of Catholic Charities Bureau and the sub-entities reveals that their activities are secular in nature. We therefore conclude that CCB and the sub-entities are not operating primarily for religious purposes. And there you have it. So the Wisconsin Supreme Court said these organizations are doing secular work. They have to pay into the unemployment tax. That is an incredible conclusion that they came to. They're not just saying, we don't care that you're Catholic. I'm sorry, they're not saying, oh, you're Catholic, so I guess we'll give you whatever you want. You may remember the US Supreme Court, when Hobby Lobby, the company, said we don't want to give our employees access to contraception under Obamacare. The US Supreme Court's like, yeah, but your owners are Christian, so I guess it's a Christian company. They can do whatever they want in the name of Jesus. Like, that was a horrible decision years ago. But the Wisconsin Supreme Court here is saying, we don't care if the Catholic Church is literally your boss. The work you're doing is not Catholic, so you don't get to pretend to be Catholic in order to get out of paying taxes. So from here on out, it looks like charities will have to do a lot more than like point to a nearby cross to say they deserve a faith-based tax exemption. I mean, part of why this is such a big deal is because it almost feels courageous for any powerful court to state the obvious and to not give religious groups whatever the hell they want. But just because an organization cites a religious link doesn't make it religious. I mean, one article asked Patrick Elliott, who is an attorney for the Freedom from Religion Foundation, what would have happened if they ruled the other way? And the thing he said is that if the judges had said, sure, these organizations are religious because they're overseen by a religious entity, the next step, I'm quoting from Patrick here, the next step would be arguments to exempt religious hospitals and colleges like Marquette University from paying the unemployment tax, because those are also providing a secular service. You know what I mean? So this is a win for everybody. It's a win for employees who work for those organizations because now they get coverage too under Wisconsin's unemployment system. I want to show you one other thing here, which is that the three conservatives on Wisconsin's Supreme Court, they are so mad about all of this. They've been mad for over a year now, ever since the liberals took the majority on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. But they did issue a dissenting opinion on this case. And let me show you the top of this. Here's the beginning. This is from Justice Rebecca Grassel Bradley. What's the first thing she writes in her dissent? It's a Bible verse from the King James Bible. Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. Here's what's really funny about her citing a Bible verse to open up her dissent. Let's just scroll down, shall we? One paragraph. Impermissibly entangling the government in church doctrine, the majority astonishingly declares Catholic charities are not operated primarily for religious purposes because their activities are not religious in nature. She's mad because she says the liberal majority on Wisconsin Supreme Court are entangling church and state, and how dare they do that? And yet here's this Wisconsin judge, and what is she saying at the top of her dissent here? Let me just quote the Bible in my secular court opinion here, my dissent. Like, what the hell are you doing? This is why people don't take their conservatives seriously. I also want to show you what the other side got really mad about here. This is something that the conservative lawyers who represented Catholic charities, check this one out. The Wisconsin Supreme Court got this case dead wrong, said the vice president and senior counsel at the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty, the law firm representing Catholic charities. CCB is religious, whether Wisconsin recognizes that fact or not. And the firm will appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, said a spokesperson for the group. Like, first of all, it is telling that Rosbach's response there doesn't bother mentioning any of the facts I just covered with you because they don't help his case. No one is arguing that Catholic Charities is not Catholic. No one's arguing the Catholic Church is not Catholic. The question is, are the organizations that are underneath at the bottom of the pyramid here, are they Catholic in nature? And when you look at the work they do, there's nothing Catholic-y about it. Like, it's telling he doesn't say that because he wanted that soundbite instead. But honestly, a ruling like this, it's long overdue. It's long past time we stop giving religious organizations everything they want. And you have to think about how many times do religious organizations get everything they want? There was a story on Inside Edition last week by their reporter Lisa Guerrero, who's fantastic, about megachurch pastors who don't pay taxes on their mega mansions, McMansions. Why not? Because they can claim their homes are owned by their ministries, and so they get a property tax exemption that they really don't deserve and they definitely don't need. You know, should religious ministries be allowed to claim tax exemptions on everything they want just because they have some sort of religious connection? I don't think so. Like, what happens when the Mormon church starts owning land in various states, which they do? Can they just say, yeah, we're farming on it because we can make money off of it? Should they be able to declare a religious tax exemption on that land? Of course not. And to be fair, they don't. They do pay taxes on that land by and large, as far as I could tell. But serving the poor, serving the needy, that is not inherently religious just because some people want to pretend that's a religious thing. And look, at the end of the day, none of this stops the Catholic Church from doing what it feels it needs to do. If they think that they need to help people, and my God, good for them. If they want to help people, no one's stopping them. They can absolutely help people. No one is trying to shut down their charities. No one's trying to shut down the organizations. If anything, by paying into the unemployment system, what they'll be doing is even more good. Because not only are they helping people who need the charitable help, they're helping people who are unemployed. That sounds like a win-win for everybody. Like, taxes are good if they go to the right things. You know what I mean? So by appealing this to the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, here's what the Catholic Church and the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty is saying. They're saying screwing over the unemployed is a core part of who we are as Catholics. Like, whatever goodwill they might have preserved by saying we're just trying to help the less fortunate, here they are saying, no, we also want to screw over the people who need it the most, the unemployed. By the way, look at this from Becket Religious Fund. This is their website. Look at how they phrase this before the decision came out. Catholic ministry asked court to recognize that serving the poor is religious. Like, that is maybe a heart-gripping headline, but that's not accurate at all. Serving the poor is not religious. It's a nice thing to do, but it's not religious. Plenty of secular people want to help the poor as well. And the whole argument is just because you say something like that is religious doesn't make it religious. And that is why they lost this case, and they deserve to lose this case. So, yay, it's about time. I'm going to pause there for a bit. Den, we can do some questions here if we would like while I close one of the 3 gazillion tabs we have today. Sorry, what was that one? Good job, courts. Yes, agreed. I mean, it is so rare these days to get a court win at a high level that actually has some meaning and impact. So yeah, this is just wonderful to see. And kudos to Wisconsin for electing Janet Protasiewicz last year. I think churches have gotten a free ride for long enough. They seem to think they make a contribution to society, but they only help themselves. Let me push back on this a little bit. I want to give the Catholic Church in this case, but plenty of religious charities do awesome work. I like that they exist. I like that the charities are doing the work they do. And the weird thing is, in this case, the charities are actually amazing. They're not saying we're going to feed the homeless, but also we're going to make sure they get a Bible when they get their food or something like that, or saying you have to come to a prayer service before you get whatever it is we're offering. They're not doing that, which is why the courts ruled against them. But again, like, that's kind of what you want to see in a religious charity. If you're inspired by Jesus to do something good, we would be having a very different conversation in this country if more people did that. The problem is, a lot of times charity comes with strings attached. And that's when I think you're right. That's when they're helping themselves and the charity is just a sideshow. The funny thing is, in this case in Wisconsin, the charities were doing everything right. And now they have to pay the taxes because they should, because they're an organization that does any work in the state, like they need to. But the idea that they're all helping themselves, I wish the ones that were in it for themselves, I wish they were punished for that in some way, or at least people would recognize that somehow. But in this case, these charities were actually not helping themselves. They were not advertising the Catholic Church, and that's why they have to pay taxes now. The Catholic hospital I worked for, this is from Den. The Catholic hospital I worked for had two sides, the nonprofit side and the for-profit side. There were some strange rules we had to abide by because of the duality, too. I don't doubt that for 1 second. And again, we could have a long discussion about Catholic hospitals because sometimes they're the only game in town. So you want the hospital to succeed because people are going to need their services at some point. But at the same time, because it's a Catholic hospital, they are limited in what services they provide, specifically because their religion teaches them that some things that would actually help people are bad and immoral, like birth control and contraception and, uh, you know, abortion procedures, anything like that. So, yeah, we could have a long discussion about that. Okay, could Hobby Lobby and Chick-fil-A make a play for tax exemption? That's the extreme of the issue, I feel. So this would have to come down to the US Supreme Court. Again, those are for-profit companies, so they have to pay whatever taxes they have to pay. But then the question is, if Hobby Lobby's owners, if Chick-fil-A's owners are Christian, what are the companies allowed to get away with? I mean, the obvious answer is they shouldn't be allowed to get away with anything. It doesn't matter what religion the owners are. The companies are doing, for-profit work. They're a business. They're a company. Let them abide by whatever rules every company lives by. But again, I don't know if the Supreme Court would even take up this case in Wisconsin. There's nothing controversial for them to weigh in on here. It's not like there are dueling results in different states that they need to step in and mediate here. So I would think the U.S. Supreme Court would not take up this case. But that's a bigger question that is not up for grabs right now. But yeah, they have to play by the rules that, White Castle and Panera have to live up to right now. Oh, thank you, Robin, for that donation. Thank you. I appreciate that. And anyone else can also make a donation. You get cool emoji to use in the comment thread. All right, we can remove, Den, we could remove that from the screen. And I'm going to jump to a different story. This has a video clip involved. Basically, there was a recent interview on a podcast, but the name of it doesn't matter. But appearing on this show was a Texas state representative named Matt Schaefer. And if you're not familiar with him, I'll go over who he is in just a second. But the thing he said on this interview on a Christian show was that every elected official in the country, everybody, from US president down to like your local dog catcher, they have to worship God. And they have to do everything in their power to force the law to fall in line with conservative Christian ideology. Right Wing Watch is the website that snagged this clip. Let me show it to you, and then we'll talk about it a little more here.
That is the first biblical command for all rulers and all persons in authority, is to worship God. It's all over the Bible. look at the cycle of Israel and all the kings and the rulers that came along, and they obeyed and had blessing, and then when they disobeyed, they had curses. But the overriding command to every person and every king, every state rep, every county commissioner, doesn't matter what level, that is to worship God and to love Him. And if you're not doing that, then you're out of His will, because all government is established by God. And if you're not doing it His way, then you're in disobedience. There's only two courses. There's obedience or rebellion. And those are really the only two options for any elected official.
Rebellion or obedience. Those are your two options. Like, call me a rebel, then, I guess. Like, it's not just that he's wrong, even though he's absolutely wrong. It's that he's saying this about a country that is one of the only countries in the world that explicitly separates itself from God in its founding documents. Like, outside of perfunctory mentions of a higher power, like in the Declaration of Independence or like the Year of Our Lord or whatever, like the Constitution openly rejects the idea that anyone needs to worship God, much less his God, much less a specific God, in order to serve in public office. As the saying goes, and I'm not the first person to say this, there are only two mentions of religion in the US Constitution, and both times they are preceded by the word no. Like, no religious test for public office, no religious uh we have religious freedom as well. No religion can be forced upon you. So later in that same interview, Matt Schaefer, same guy, he offered an example of Bible-based policy. He said, we have to take care of orphans, which sounds lovely. Like, I agree, we should take care of people like who are struggling and people who don't have parents. That sounds very nice. Except his definition of an orphan was an embryo after a woman decides to go through with an abortion. Here's what he actually said. How can we neglect the orphan inside the mother's womb when we have a chance to vote on people who will decide whether that is legal or not? Unquote. Like, he doesn't care at all about the living. But if you're not born yet, he's on your side, because it's always very easy to take care of people who don't exist. That's the Republican philosophy, right? And by the way, this argument that we need to take care of people who can't help themselves, that might make a little more sense if Schaefer didn't actively try to hurt people while he's in public office. Let me show you just some of the things he's done here. He has sponsored a bill allowing for carrying guns without a permit. Who needs permits? He just wants anyone to be able to carry guns anywhere. By the way, that sort of thing would inevitably create more orphans, because that's what guns do. They kill people. He also responded to a mass shooting after a major shooting in West Texas that killed several people. Matt Schaefer responded by saying no to gun restrictions, because why would you want to help people avoid gun violence? He promised to do absolutely nothing to prevent future acts of gun violence. Oh, by the way, during COVID, he also proposed a bill barring mask mandates during the height of the pandemic, even though that was going to save lives. I mean, I'll point you to one more thing here just to show you who this guy is. Last in 2015, before Roe v. Wade was overturned, there was a proposal in the Texas House that would have forced people to carry non-viable fetuses to term. Even if doctors knew like the fetus wasn't going to survive after birth, this guy, Matt Schaefer, check this out. He put forward an amendment that would make it illegal to terminate a pregnancy after 20 weeks, even if a fetus has a severe and irreversible abnormality, effectively forcing families with wanted but unsustainable pregnancies to carry to term at the behest of the state and against the advice of their doctors or their own wishes. Schaeffer said during debate over his amendment that suffering is part of the human condition since sin entered the world. He just wanted to force pregnant people to give birth to a dead fetus. Why? Because he feels like it. That's his idea of what Christianity should be able to force you to do. I mean, there's nothing in that amendment except pure cruelty. And by the way, uh, this is what Christian nationalists do. They use their faith to justify anything, even emotional or physical torture. They use God as a weapon to force bills that would never make any rational sense on their own. So after Right Wing Watch posted that clip of this guy, he decided to go on Twitter to respond to what was being said. And this is the way he responded to Right Wing Watch's statement here. Here we go. I'm a Christian. I believe the Bible is God's word. I reject the Christian nationalist label, but I stand by every word I said. Like, buddy, that's why we are calling you a Christian nationalist, because you stand by every word you said in your Christian nationalist manifesto during that interview. You don't get to reject it. It's like saying no one likes you, like, or that you're unpopular. You don't get to reject that because you don't get to decide that. The rest of us get to decide that about you. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a Christian. I believe the Bible is God's word. I believe every elected official needs to bow down to my religious faith, to my God. But don't you dare call me a Christian nationalist. Like, what the hell are you talking about? That's like the definition of Christian nationalism. By the way, there is one silver lining here, which is that this guy is not going to be seeking re-election this year. That is some good news. He said he's looking forward to spending time with his family, church, and business. Sure, but look at the rest of that subheading there. He added that he might return to politics if a Texas Senate seat opens up, because it turns out in his district, the guy in the state Senate I don't think he has made a decision about whether he's running or not. So he's like, I might get into that one and give myself a little more power. But for now, I'll let some other MAGA cultist take over my seat. So yay, he's gone, but it's not like right now he's going to get replaced by anyone better. So at least he'll be out of there. It would be nice if we could all agree that all elected officials, I don't need them to be atheists. I just need them to respect church-state separation. And I would hope that's something everyone could get behind, but unfortunately, no. You have people like this who demand that everyone be Christian like them so they could pass the worst legislation imaginable and hurt as many people as possible because that's the way Jesus wanted it. I'm going to pause there. What other questions we have here? While I'm no questions right now, I'm going to jump to this next story. Give me 1 second to pull some stuff up here. It feels good to close many of these tabs. Oh, let's talk about John MacArthur. Okay, a few weeks ago, February 19th to be specific, so during Black History Month, it turns out there is a preacher. I know some of you are familiar with him. His name is John MacArthur. He runs Grace Community Church in California. And I guess one of the things he does at his services is he does like a Q&A because he's the voice of God, and maybe someone in the congregation has a question that they need a prophet to friggin' answer. So he does Q&As during services. And someone asked him a couple weeks ago, what do you think about conservative Christian groups like the Gospel Coalition and another group called Together for the Gospel? And in case you're not familiar, the Gospel Coalition, it's a website that it's a website that posts a lot of conservative Christian stuff. They're absolutely a right-wing evangelical organization. They're anti-gay, they are anti-trans, they're anti-sex. They post some of the cringiest stuff out there. So like, it has established itself as a home for like white evangelicals who are MAGA cultists, even though they don't necessarily talk about politics. So that's the Gospel Coalition. And Together for the Gospel is also an extremely conservative group that kind of runs conferences, or at least they used to. They hold conferences to talk about all this stuff. So someone asked John MacArthur, what do you think about those two groups? And first, he called the Gospel Coalition, the website, he called it woke, which, what? Like, tells you how unhelpful that word is, because they just use it to trash anybody for no reason whatsoever. But I want to get to the next thing, which is when he talked about Together for the Gospel, the other organization, he trashed them because a few years ago they decided to honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 2018. And what he said to this crowd is that, like, they never should have honored MLK. Why? Because he's not a Christian at all. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., not a Christian at all, said MacArthur. And then he added that MLK was a non-believer who misrepresented everything about Christ and the gospel. And here, don't take it from me. Let me play you the clip so you can hear it for yourself.
Both of those organizations, well, T4G is basically non-existent. They bought into the deceptiveness of the woke movement and the racial baiting that was going on a couple of years ago, and it literally put them out of existence. I was thinking, it was a year later, they did the same thing for Martin Luther King, who was not a Christian at all, whose life was immoral. I'm not saying he didn't do some social good, and I've always been glad that he was a pacifist, or he could have started a real revolution. But you don't honor a non-believer who misrepresented everything about Christ and the gospel in an organization alongside honoring somebody like R.C. Sproul. This was a symptom of the impact of the woke movement that basically displaced that whole organization. That was really, it was over after that.
What is that? What is, okay. Everything he said there's so many lies in what he said there. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he wasn't perfect, but obviously his faith-based fight for social justice and civil rights, not only did he link together his religious beliefs and what he was fighting for, he wasn't alone. I mean, many Black leaders before him and since then have also used religion as justification for why they are pushing for equal rights and civil rights and voting rights. I appreciated what one pastor said in response to John MacArthur. This is from Faithfully magazine here. This is from, I need to quote, Charlie Dates of Progressive Baptist Church in Chicago. Go away, ad. I can't remove that. I don't know why. Disappear. It won't let it disappear. Sorry. But look at this top quotation. If you ain't going to raise a finger to help us get the right to vote, to live where we want to live, to go to school where we want to go, keep Martin King's name out of your mouth. Love it. That's a great quotation. But again, like, even if Martin Luther King Jr. wasn't Christian, you would think the values that he fought for were important enough that they ought to override any of his personal foibles. But the argument doesn't even make sense on John MacArthur's own terms, because someone writing for Christianity Today, which is absolutely a conservative Christian outlet, this is what he said in response to MacArthur's thing. I spoke at that event held by Together for the Gospel. He said, I spoke at MLK 50, and I don't recall seeing any speakers who weren't unambiguously orthodox. MacArthur's accusations aren't only too lightly made, they are plainly slanderous. Like, this guy's saying, I was at that conference where they honored MLK. Everyone there was conservative Christian, and also you're lying about everything you're saying about the organization, about MLK. Like, what are you doing? So there, I mean, when Christianity Today, which is conservative, says you've gone too far, you've gone too far. I mean, to claim MLK wasn't a true Christian and therefore should not be honored by any decent conservative Christian organization, that's the sort of thing that's a right-wing talking point that used to be on the fringes, and now it's moved to like mainstream Republican talking. It's a mainstream Republican talking point these days, and now it's shifting over to the churches. Like, conservatives have spent years trying to discredit Martin Luther King. This is an article that is from earlier this year from Wired magazine, how Charlie Kirk plans to discredit MLK Jr. and the Civil Rights Act. Like, they're preparing to launch a campaign against MLK and the civil rights law he helped enact. That's from January of this year. This is something that you expect to see from crazy right-wing MAGA people, and yet it's also seeping into conservative Christian churches. Yes, some of them are pushing back right now. I do wonder how long that's going to last, where they're defending Martin Luther King. But again, the reason I think this is important is John MacArthur is not some random dude with no followers. He is a very, very powerful Christian leader. In fact, Christianity Today, this is from, I wanted to cite this correctly. This is from several years ago. Christianity Today once published a list of the 25 most influential preachers in the country. And lo and behold, who's on this list here? There's John MacArthur. I mean, by the way, who's above him? Bill Hybels, who later stepped down because of sexual aggression of some sort. But John MacArthur is powerful. He's been powerful for a long time in the conservative Christian world. So he's not a nobody. That's why it's worth taking his words seriously and pushing back against them. And I also want to point out a different lie that John MacArthur has told about Martin Luther King Jr. He previously said on multiple occasions that he was preaching in Mississippi with black church leaders on the night MLK was assassinated. And who was there alongside him? Medgar Evers' son, Charlie. Like, a real black leader's son was right there preaching alongside him. And he said, MacArthur said, literally within hours after Dr. King was assassinated, we were at the Lorraine Motel standing on the balcony where he was shot. And do you know what a lot of those black civil rights leaders, Christian leaders said about MacArthur's story, that he was there when MLK was shot? Iconic civil rights leader tells Pastor John MacArthur to stop lying. This even got attention in the Roy's Report, another Christian outlet. Is John MacArthur's story about Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination true? And you know, whenever there's a question mark in a headline, the answer is no. But like, this guy's been lying about MLK for a long time. Let me keep going. He has also argued, John MacArthur has also argued, that the curse of Ham was justification for slavery. What is the curse of Ham? Well, in the book of Genesis, Ham, the character Ham, he curses his son by saying all of your descendants are going to be slaves. And Christians in the past have used that story to justify racism against people with dark skin. It's known as the curse of Ham. You can Google that. You will find examples of it. And MacArthur has also argued that that was justification for slavery. But wait, it gets worse. Here's a video clip I'm going to show you of John MacArthur literally defending slavery. I want to repeat this. This is one of the most powerful fundamentalist Calvinist Christian preachers in the country. Here he is openly defending slavery, if it's done the way he likes it.
It is a little strange that we have such an aversion to slavery because historically there have been abuses. You know, there have been abuses in marriage. We don't have an aversion to marriage, particularly, because there have been abuses. So to throw out slavery as a concept simply because there have been abuses, I think, is to miss the point. In any kind of human relationship, there can be abuses. There can also be benefits. For many people, poor people, perhaps people who weren't educated, perhaps people who had no other opportunity, working for a gentle, caring, loving master was the best of all possible worlds. If you had the right master, everything was taken care of. So we have to go back and take a more honest look at slavery and understand that God has, in a sense, legitimized it when it's handled correctly. Slavery is not objectionable if you have the right master. It's the perfect scenario.
Not objectionable if you have the right master. It's the perfect scenario. Why do you guys hate slavery so much? All you need is a good slave master, and everything would be cool. Just because some people are bad at owning slaves, it ruins it for the rest of the people, just like him. So look, I'm just saying John MacArthur is a total racist. Like his criticism of MLK, when you hear other things he has said about slavery, about racism, like he's not really the spokesperson you want, and yet he is super powerful. By the way, just to run down another list of some stupid stuff he has said, he has argued that climate change is something we can ignore because, quote, God intended us to use this planet and it is a disposable planet. He openly celebrated the lack of social distancing and face masks in his congregation during the height of COVID. He once told a packed church in the middle of COVID, the good news is you're here, you're not distancing, and you're not wearing masks, as if that was a good thing. And in August of 2020, like, you know how bad things were in August of 2020 before the vaccines were available, he falsely claimed there is no pandemic. That's a quote. And by the way, that October, there was an outbreak at his church. I believe he also caught COVID during that time. He has also said, by the way, and I'm quoting here, no one is gay. Like that's just a standalone lie. So this John MacArthur, he's not a Christian preacher deserving of respect. He's a conspiracy theorist who regurgitates racist lies and tells a bunch of ignorant people stuff that he treats as facts. But he is one of the most famous pastors, preachers in the country, and he believes Black Christian preachers who promote social justice are not good Christians. I guess the question is how many other conservative Christians agree, but sadly, the answer is a whole bunch of them. Otherwise, he wouldn't be this powerful. Gonna pause there for a bit. What else we got here? I know there's a couple coming. I'm going to open up this next story, and while I look, fundamentalist Christians are very good at invalidating others. No kidding. They love putting down other people and raising themselves up. And if you put down other people, I mean, automatically you're better off, right? Uh, what's the next one there? No other questions right now. White Christian nationalists invalidate MLK and probably reference him as a descendant of Ham. Like, I wouldn't put it past you. That is the gist you get when you hear or you read what John MacArthur has said. And I haven't even gotten into some of the other crazy stuff he has said over the years, because there's a laundry list of horrible things this guy has said and done. What else we got? Does he believe that crazy-ish? Does he? I'm assuming you're talking about things Mormons believe black is the color of the children of Cain. Yeah, I think that's where he's going with when it comes to the curse of Ham. That like black skin color is a way that God punished certain people. That is something a lot of fundamentalists believe. What's sad is that he thinks bigotry spewed from the pulpit will get a free pass. Sadder still is that it will get a free pass. We'll get a pass from the congregation. I mean, yeah, that's really the scariest thing. Like during COVID, when he was at his most dangerous, like all the MLK stuff he's saying is harmful and wrong, but it's this guy saying something harmful and wrong. He's been doing that his entire career. But during COVID, he was actively putting people in harm's way, and they continued to celebrate him at the time. Like, that's when you know things are bad, when these people are willing to give up their own health to follow what this guy is doing because they think he has all the answers. The right keeps drifting farther and farther right. No kidding. I mean, just look at what's going on Twitter X. like where they're promoting just the worst conspiratorial voices, and they're all on board. It seems like there are no sane Republicans left to moderate any of those people. It is scary. We don't have to do anything except recognizing and calling out the stupidity. I agree. I mean, that's the least we can do, right? Point it out, call it out, push back against it. They're not listening to us, but we can do it for the people who might come across our way before they get to them. Thank you, Dan's Backcountry. Hope you're doing well as well. Thank you. All right, I'm going to jump to the next story here. There was a fascinating survey that came out today on Friday from the Pew Research Center. And the bottom line of this survey, let me share this with you. 8 in 10 Americans say religion is losing influence in public life, which at first I saw the headline. I was like, I love that. I wish religion was losing influence in public life. That sounds wonderful. But then when you dig into the data, it's not as exciting as it seems. But here's the thing the Pew Research Center was talking about. This is the main chart. The share of Americans who say religion's influence is declining is as high as it's ever been. So, what percentage of US adults say religion is losing influence in American life? You could see at the dark blue at the top here, it's higher than it's ever been. 80% of Americans say religion is losing influence. Only 18% say it's gaining influence. But also, as much as I wish that were true, that religion was losing influence, it's absolutely not losing its influence. If anything, if you've watched anything I've talked about for the past several weeks, it's gaining an influence, and it's gaining an influence in the worst possible ways, because you can no longer separate Republican politics and policies from what the Christian nationalists want. So right now, religion, and specifically conservative Christianity, is as powerful, more powerful than it has ever been. So this idea that 80% of Americans say it's losing influence, like, they're wrong, but also they seem very ignorant of what's actually happening here. I want to go through some of the things that were in this survey because it's worth digging into the numbers specifically. Check out this graphic right here. Okay, 49% of Americans. Okay, so this is where some of these numbers are coming from. 49% of Americans say religion's influence is declining, and that's bad. Look at this light blue. The far over there, the far left number here, the 8% say religion's influence is growing, and that's a good thing. Those people live in crazy town because it's not, I mean, it is growing, I would argue, but that's not a good thing because it's the worst kind of religion. But look at the lighter blue next to it. 49% of Americans say religion's influence is declining, and that's bad. That's about half of America right there. They want to see more religion in our public life. And it's like, I think you need to explain what you mean by religion. But overall, you could see what it says is 57% of Americans have a net positive view of religion. They either want it to be growing and that's a good thing, or they say it's declining and that's bad. Because all of those people think, in the blue, they say we want religion to be more powerful because that's a good thing. You could see only 19% of Americans, that's in the orange and red over there, only 19% of Americans have a negative view of religion. They think it's growing in influence and that's bad, or it's declining in influence and that's good. So, like, those are the big numbers right there. But let me talk about a couple. I mean, let me back away from the numbers for a second. If you believe, as I do, that religion is a largely pernicious force in the United States, I mean, you can just point to religion to see how it influences anti-abortion laws, anti-LGBTQ policies. It gives Donald Trump the support he needs to make another run for the White House. Like, that's what religion in the United States has done lately. Then these results suggest we have a long way to go. And by we, I mean the people who might watch a live stream like this one. We have a long way to go when it comes to educating Americans about why they are better off without faith playing a significant role in our lives. And again, I know religion is not synonymous with Christianity, but when we talk about religion's influence in our society, it's kind of hard to separate the two. Like, no other religion in America has the power of Christianity, and no kind of Christian has as much outsized, unfortunate influence as conservative Christians do. Like, listen, if progressive Christians had all the power, we'd be having a very different conversation. Um, but look at it. Let me show you one other thing, because this I found kind of funny. What about the presidential candidates? Do people think Joe Biden and Donald Trump are religious? This is amazing to me. Look at this. Look at Joe Biden first. When it comes to Republicans, what percent of Republicans say Joe Biden is very religious? By the way, correct answer is he's absolutely very religious. He's super Catholic. He doesn't like abortion. You know what I mean? That's what I mean by he's super Catholic. But publicly speaking, when it comes to his policies, he's doing what Democrats want him to do by and large, minus everything happening in Israel and Gaza. But look at this. Only 3% of Republicans say he's very religious, and only 26% of Americans say he's somewhat religious. Like, that's objectively wrong. And even among all US adults, only 54%, that's in the dark gray and the light gray at the top there, only 54% of Americans seem to think Joe Biden is religious at all. Like, what are you doing? He absolutely is. Those people are so wrong about that. Now, meanwhile, let's look at Donald Trump above my head here. Among Republicans, 6% of Republicans say Donald Trump is very religious. I don't know where the hell those people are coming from. 44% think he's somewhat religious, whatever the hell that means. Like, what are those people doing? I know Donald Trump pays lip service to the religious right, and he does whatever the religious right wants. But how dumb do you have to be to think Donald Trump is very religious or even somewhat religious? What? No, not even close. Like, he's not an atheist. He never thinks about religion because he's too busy thinking about himself. But all of these people, what the hell are they talking about? His decisions are not based on his personal religious views. He's not Mike Johnson. He's not thumping you over the head with the Bible all the time. But because Joe Biden doesn't do that either, they think he's practically an atheist. One thing I found interesting in all this data they had here in the Pew Research stuff is that, in 2015 and 2016, Christian leaders, I remember this, I'm old enough to remember this, Christian leaders spent a lot of time attempting to explain how Donald Trump may not act or sound like one of them, like referring to his 2 Corinthians gaffe, or how he brags about, sexually abusing women. Yeah, he doesn't talk like us and his lifestyle isn't like us, but they said he's working on it. They didn't just say he was good for judges. That was a little too transactional at the time. They said he's working on it. James Dobson, the founder of Focus on the Family and a very powerful evangelical in his own right, said in 2016 that Trump had recently become born again, that he personally knew who led Donald Trump to Christ. And then he added, Donald Trump was a baby Christian, which, I mean, half right. These days, you do not even see Christian leaders trying to do that. No one on the Christian right is pretending that Donald Trump is a Christian. They can't get away with it because we know too much about the guy. So they decided, you know what? Even Christians don't believe my lies about this. So now they're just like, listen, if you're conservative Christian, Trump isn't one of us, but like maybe God is acting in a mysterious way and Trump will give us all the policies and judges we want. So, hold your nose and go vote for him. That's what they're doing now, because even they know they can't convince Christians that Donald Trump is Christian. And yet all those Republicans still say Trump is Christian, which is bananas. The funny thing about that is, Jimmy Carter, for example, deeply religious, famously religious, and I would argue like the living embodiment of the best kind of Christianity. And yet, all those Republicans would be like, Jimmy Carter is not religious. He's a heathen, which, again, Makes no sense at all, but that's how warped their minds are right now. By the way, somewhere else in the survey, it said 67% of Republicans said Trump stands up for people of faith. Okay, only one kind of faith, but okay. And white evangelicals, 69% of white evangelicals said he stands up for their faith. But the gap between his rhetoric and his reputation and what he actually believes, like, that's never been wider. Okay, moving on to a different part of the Pew survey, like, what about religion in general? Have conservative Christians, for example, gone too far in imposing their views on the government and in public schools? That was a question they asked. Let me show you those results for a second. I'll blow this up so you can see it. And basically, the answer is yes. I mean, conservative Christians have obviously gone too far. We wouldn't be talking about book bans and all the anti-trans legislation around the country and anti-abortion stuff if there wasn't an undercurrent of conservative Christianity steering lawmakers in a harmful direction. But look at this. Only, I'm looking at the far left here. Conservative Christians have gone too far in trying to push their religious values in the government and public schools. Look at this. Only 48% of US adults say conservative Christians have gone too far. 49% say no. What world are they living in where conservative Christians have not gone far enough in all of these issues? Like, what the hell are they talking about? And this is even more damning when it comes to liberals who are not religious, secular liberals. Hey, people like us. Have they gone too far in trying to keep religious values out of the government and public schools? 50% of US adults at the top there said yes. Half of Americans think people like us have gone too far in keeping religion out of government and public schools. And I want to remind you, what does it look like when we're trying to keep religion out of public schools and government? We are not saying, let's teach kids to be atheists. Let's impose atheism on the world. That never happens. Our side says, hey, maybe keep it neutral, keep church and state separate, and do what's best for the people in these communities and for the country. Neutrality is what we're fighting for. What are conservative Christians fighting for? For a warped vision of how they think, whatever they think the Bible is telling them to do. But half of Americans think those conservative Christians don't go far enough. They're fine with whatever conservative Christians are doing. But half of Americans think us fighting for religious neutrality are going too far and pushing our secular liberalism. Like, that is just misinformation seeping into the public discourse. And that's disturbing. As if neutrality is the same thing as being anti-religious. That's the power of the conservative media environment right there, whether it's Fox News or social media that is run by conservatives, or the whole right-wing Joe Rogan echo chamber, I should say. Like, many Americans are being spoon-fed lies about what is actually going on, to the point where half of them think we're the bad guys for pushing neutrality. And by the way, here's a perfect example of how bad the education is on these issues. The Pew Research Center asked people about Christian nationalism. Have you heard of Christian nationalism? And look at this. This is disturbing. Americans' view of Christian nationalism have been stable. So from September of 2022 to February of 2024, last month, how many people have heard about or read about Christian nationalism? It's 45%. Then it's 45% now. That number hasn't budged. And even when you break it down by specifics, whether they like it or they're against it, those numbers have barely moved. What percentage of people have never heard or read about Christian nationalism? It's identical, 54%. More than half of Americans have never heard of Christian nationalism. Like, at a time when Christian nationalism is the basis for the Republican platform, basically, for Project 2025, which is the blueprint for what Republicans plan to do if they control enough of the government. The fact that most Americans, 54% of Americans, have no clue about that link between conservative Christian ideology and government, That is a failure of communication. And you can blame a lot of people for that, but specifically, you have to blame mainstream journalists for not talking about it enough. You have to blame Democratic Party leaders for not mentioning it all the damn time. Like, I think they're so afraid of criticizing faith at all that they're now failing to condemn the most destructive form of it. And that should scare all of us, because that should be an easy win for the people who talk about it. Let me point you to something else that was also in this survey. Oh my God, there was so much disturbing stuff. Let's talk about church state separation. Should the government keep church and state separate? Look at this. 55% of adults said the government should enforce the separation of church and state. That's good. But 16% said no, they shouldn't be doing that. And 28% said they have no opinion. Like, if only a little more than half of Americans say, yeah, I'm for church state separation, that's not nearly as high as it should be, and that's disturbing. Then look at this. What percentage of adults say the federal government should declare Christianity the official religion of the US? 13% seriously want a theocracy. To hell with church state separation. And you know, those 13% put on their MAGA hats and are like, I'm a patriot. And they carry around their little pocket constitutions, but they want a theocracy. What percentage say, no, we shouldn't declare Christianity the official religion of the US, but we should promote Christian moral values? That's 44% of Americans. What the hell? This is how you know it's bad, because they think Christianity is synonymous with goodness. And if anyone's been paying attention, you know it's not. And of course, if we had this is Christian nationalism, that middle batch, because they'll go out and say, like, no, we're not trying to form a theocracy. We just think it's a Christian nation and we should do whatever the Bible tells us. Like, that middle 44%, that's the Christian nationalist base right there. That's why that group is so powerful, because they think, oh, they're promoting Christianity. That's a good thing. And yeah, what does that mean in practice? In practice, that means, yeah, let's just harass LGBTQ people. Let's force ourselves upon women because they don't have the ability to make decisions. Let's make it for them. Put Ted Cruz between your legs. He knows what's better for ladies. So all of that is a failure of education on our part. I want to leave you with at least some good news from this report. And here's one thing I wanted to show you. Look at this. Most US adults, they have a positive view of religion's role in American life. We talked about that already. But look at this. When you look at age breakdown, I'm going to blow this up a little more here. Oh, I lied. I can't really break it up. Oh, there we go. Look at these numbers. What this is saying, I'm going to scroll up here so you could see it. Who has a positive view, a net positive view of religion? If I scroll back down here, look at the age breakdown. For people ages 65 and up, 72% of the elderly have a positive view of religion. But notice what happens as you get lower and lower. Look what happens for people under the age of 30. It is cut in half. Only 36% of people ages 18 to 29 have a positive view of religion. And look at the right side here. Who has a net negative view of religion just above my head? Among young people, 30% of young people have a negative view of religion. It's only 10% of the elderly. So the long-term trends here are not good for organized religion. And the people who want to blend religion and government, I mean, again, they have too much power right now. They want to get more of it. But young people especially are not happy with it. And I would also point out that young people under the age of 30, they are the ones that are most affected by anti-abortion laws, anti-contraception laws, anti-IVF laws, anti-sex laws. They're the ones who are in the stage of either having children or thinking about having children. So they're directly affected by what Christian lawmakers are trying to do, and they don't like it. And I hope Democrats are smart enough to jump on that when they're trying to make a move here, when they're trying to persuade people otherwise. I would also suggest, elsewhere in this report, it also said there was a line, it suggested there was a line of attack Democrats could use because 72% of Democratic voters said conservative Christians have gone too far in pushing their beliefs, which is why I think Democratic candidates need to openly express their support for church state separation. They need to say, if you elect me, I'm going to block these right wing, faith based bigots from taking away our freedoms. And by the way, 23% of Republicans feel the same way. And that means those potential campaign ads could also speak to some of those Republicans, and you better believe a hell of a lot of independent swing voters too, because it's a powerful thing to campaign on. So I would think the possibility of an impending theocracy, if in practice, if not in name, you would think that would make more voters care about these issues. But again, most Americans don't pay any attention to politics. They are apathetic about Christian nationalism and right-wing politics. But there are several months before Election Day, and people who understand what we are up against, and that's probably all of you, do everything you can to educate the people around you, educate voters about Christian nationalism, why it's a bad thing, why religious influence in politics hurts everybody. It hurts all of our lives, because that's what we need to do if we want to fix this before the problem gets worse, and then to the point where we can't fix it anymore. Gonna pause there to take some questions. Oh, thanks for that. As a mental health professional, I have seen religious organizations take advantage of people with mental illness constantly. It's predatory. I don't doubt that for a second. And again, there are religious groups that do good work, but I wish those groups that are doing good work are the first ones in line to condemn the religious groups that are doing it badly. And a lot of times they're the ones who are silent about everything, which is always really depressing because it means more coming from them. But thank you for that super chat. I agree. I've heard interviews with people who do polling, and they say the vocabulary is often used to manipulate people's answers. And that is true. There is push polling. There is, if you hear words like Christian nationalism without a definition, you may not know what that means. So I'm not saying you got to use the terminology that is known to people who follow politics, but trying to make the case that one religious group should not get to decide policy that affects everybody. I think a lot of people could get on board with that idea that, of course, that's a bad thing. So again, it's about educating people in ways that will reach them, that will affect them, that will change their minds. And for all of you, this is something all of us can do, whether it's working as an election official or something like that. Your circle of friends, what arguments it might take to convince them of something. And if you know people, they trust you. So you make the case to them, because you won't get to maybe reach millions of people, but you can reach your circle of friends, your colleagues in some way. And if you live in a swing state, man, I hope you are doing everything you can to convince people around you to vote for Democrats. And then, work to make the Democrats do exactly what you want. But I promise you things are going to get worse if you're voting for Republicans at any level. Who did this survey? I questioned their method for finding respondents. It is the Pew Research Center, and I will admit they tend to do some of the best work in terms of making sure they are hitting a demographically representative group of Americans. Of all the criticism I've heard of polling, Pew Research is pretty damn good at doing this stuff. So I usually like their surveys. Doesn't mean I like the results, as you could see from this one, but they usually do a really good job of making sure they are reaching as many representative Americans as possible. I see conservative Christians openly targeting people who are vulnerable adults on Social Security by exasperating their symptoms, convincing them to give what little money they have. Yeah, man, I agree. I know it's happening. It's really frustrating, and it's so hard when shit's flying at you from every single corner. It is hard to try to stop it all at once. So sometimes you just have to try to aim your mark and say, okay, well, this is bad. Let's try to stop this. And then you aim elsewhere. But again, this is an overall problem that I wish more people with large platforms would talk about. One problem I see is that schools shy away from even teaching about world religions and their powerful influences, past and present. I wonder where that's happening because, I mean, good schools do teach the basics of world religions. I don't need them to say, here's why Christianity is bad. I don't need them to do that. I don't want them to do that. But again, my worry is not necessarily with what middle schoolers or high schoolers are learning about religion. It's that it's so easy for adults to check out and not pay any attention to any of this stuff because politics is boring and the news is boring and it makes me depressed. And like, I get that. And the fear is that the people who are in a position to make those decisions and vote and run for office, I mean, the people who are running for office are the people who have a vested interest in this stuff, and it's usually not the good kind of interest. But the people who can vote often shy away. They don't want to talk about this. They don't want to think about this. They don't vote. Apathy is the enemy right now. So trying to get people to understand, like, no, I need you to care about this because it affects all of us. That's the hard thing to convince them. And it's, again, just pointing out, trashing Christian nationalism, which is totally legitimate and a good thing to do, is not the same as trashing Christianity. Like, there are plenty of Christians who should be against Christian nationalism and what conservatives are doing in the name of their God. So, like, we can have a separate discussion about religion itself. I like go talk to Matt Dillahunty about that stuff. I'm talking about the despicable version of Christianity that plays a role in politics in the worst way, because that's what these people are trying to do, and it's scary. Do people know what nationalism is? Probably not. They don't know what white nationalism is. They don't know what Christian nationalism is. They just think, I'm guessing they probably just think it's patriotic. Nationalism is good. I love my country. That's my fear. And again, this is the verbiage thing that don't use the language of Christian nationalism. Describe what it does. Who should be making decisions? Who should be making your medical decisions? Should it be you and your doctor? Or should it be a Republican in office who is hell bent on making the decisions for you because he thinks Jesus is telling him what to do? That's a frightening thought. Who takes these polls? I've never had the opportunity to take one. I mean, that's the thing about representative samples. They will sample thousands of people, but in a country of hundreds and hundreds of millions, yeah, it may not reach you specifically. But if you go to the Pew Research Center's website right now, you could see their methodology. They are very comprehensive in explaining how they reached people, what they did to get to people, and you could see what they're doing. Thanks for gifting a membership to somebody. I appreciate that, and thank you for the super sticker. Excellent. And hey, we have a member. Thanks, Rob. I appreciate that. All right. Shall I go on? I will move on to the next story. I haven't posted this one yet, but I wanted to talk about it because I feel like we deserve some good news. And this is it good news? It's not good news, but it made me happy to learn. There is a research paper that got published recently, and I'm going to tell you the headline right away. In 2024, according to this research, Christian leaders around the world are going to steal an estimated $86 billion from their followers. That's what this came down to. And this is called ecclesiastical crime, according to the researchers. They said it'll jump to $390 billion by 2050. So this is research that was done by 3 researchers at the Center for the Study of Global Christianity, which is part of the Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. And the numbers are tucked away in a research paper. I would show it to you, but it's not available for public viewing. But I will point you to a watchdog group called the Trinity Foundation, because they just posted an article about this. They monitor like how Christian leaders spend money, and they're really good at what they do. But this is their headline: Christian religious leaders to embezzle $86 billion in 2024. Look at this line right here. Here's what ecclesiastical crime means. It takes on many forms, such as skimming from an offering plate, restricted donation fraud, where you say, you're donating money for a mission trip, but then they divert it to their personal expense account, and international cash smuggling. Televangelists have transferred funds across international borders on private jets and failed to report those transactions, resulting in bulk cash smuggling. So that right there is just wild. That's what type of money laundering we're talking about here. And we know this sort of thing occurs. I think just a couple of weeks ago, I talked about a Christian couple that was arrested for like crypto crimes. Like they told people to give them money to invest in some sort of cryptocurrency, and then it turned out to be a scam. Like, and here's the thing about Christian crimes, financial crimes. It's really hard to pinpoint how much crime occurs under the veil of Christianity. And that can be blamed on everything from the fact that churches don't have to file financial reports with the IRS to the fact that they would blame crime on everything but religion, to the fact that if something does happen in your church and someone stole thousands of dollars from your church, you may not want to say that out loud. You may want to keep that on the DL so no one finds out about it. Like, it's kind of like tracking sales in a black market. All you're ever going to get are estimates because you literally can't keep track of what's happening. That's why it's called a black market. You know what I mean? So how did they figure this out? Well, several years ago, these researchers, and I can show you this, several years ago, these same researchers put out a paper where they tried to figure all this out. Their paper was called Embezzlement in the Global Christian Community. And in this article, this is from 2015, one of the things they pointed out, and I'm going to scroll over to Sci-Hub here and get a copy of this paper. One of the things they pointed out in the paper, here we go. This is the part I want to show you. Let me zoom in. There we go. Sorry, I'm trying to make this bigger so you can all see it. Nonprofit, here we go, on the left side here. Nonprofit organizations, especially those that begin as small, there we go, under-resourced, volunteer-run organizations, face even tougher challenges in combating financial fraud because they often focus on their mission rather than strong administrative practices. A neglect of financial concerns can easily result. This neglect can be exacerbated when they enjoy tax-exempt status, as in the United States. Nonprofits also tend to be more trusting of their employees, assuming that they share the organization's philanthropic goals. And I only point that out to say, like, churches are really bad at catching these crimes because most churches are not like Kenneth Copeland Ministries. You know what I mean? They're small churches, handful of employees at most. Most of those people are not experts in financial anything. They're just trying to do their job to help their church. So it's really easy for someone to do bad things. It's really easy to not know that someone's stealing money from you because of that. So here's what these researchers did in this paper. They looked at data compiled by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, which found that in the US economy, we lose approximately 6% of our gross domestic product, our GDP, to fraud each year. Like, of all the money the US makes every year, we lose about 6% of it to fraud. That's according to a secular organization that studies fraud. And by using that metric, they applied it to how much money Christians give to their ministries, churches around the world. And this is what they found here. I'm going to share this with you if I can pull this up. Here we go. Check out this. Here's what they just compiled. This is back in 2015 when they did the embezzlement thing. You could see at the top row, they're looking at different parts of the world, how much money people gave to various causes. But look at this. Actual giving by Christians. And look at the left side. How much did they give to all causes? How much did Christians donate to charity? How much did they give to secular causes? How much did they give to Christian causes? And if I scroll to the total all the way on the right, you could see at the top here, Christians in 2015 gave $850.9 billion to charity, and they gave $773.5 billion to Christian charities like their churches. So they gave a lot of money. Using that number, they said, well, what's 6% of that number? And they got about 50 billion. They're saying 50 billion in fraud. So here's what they did in their recent paper. And let me share this with you as well. In their recent paper, they say, well, let's look at Christianity now. And you could see again, look at the left side, the things here, personal income of Christians. How much are they giving to Christian causes? And how much is being stolen in fraud, ecclesiastical crime? Look at those last two rows. In 2024, these researchers said Christians are giving $1.3 trillion to Christian charities. And looking at the fraud estimates now, that's about 86 billion lost to fraud. That's where they're getting that number from. And look at their estimates for 2050. They say Christians will give $5.2 trillion to Christian charities, which means you're going to see about $390 billion in fraud stolen from those places. And I think it's worth mentioning, these researchers do not treat Christians with any different or special deference here. Like, they're basically saying financial fraud exists everywhere. Churches and ministries are no different. That's a very secular way of looking at the problem, and I appreciate that. In their paper, they also mention, I know one person is pointing out 8 billion in the comments here. I'm just pointing this out. 8 billion is not 10% of 270. You know what? I don't know where you're getting those numbers from, so I'm going to come back to that later. But I want to say the researchers also pointed out there are ways they could stop the fraud. Churches could do routine financial audits. They could have more transparency about how much money is coming in, how much is going out, and where it's going out to. They could have better training for their staff. They could have more oversight for any employee with access to church money. They could also get insurance coverage for fraud. They could take direct action if there are suspicions of criminal activity. The problem is that a lot of these churches are so small that they don't have the ability or desire to do any of these things. Because, like, when a little old granny is the person taking in the money every week, what are you going to do? Make her go through a financial training seminar? Probably not. A lot of churches, including mega churches, definitely don't do transparency. They don't let their own congregations know how much money is going out and how much the pastor is taking in and things like that. They're shady as hell when it comes to that stuff. And the IRS does not make them, they don't treat churches like other nonprofits where you have to tell them how much is coming in and going out. So churches are not going to be able to stop fraud entirely, but they could absolutely minimize it if they cared about this stuff the way larger companies did. A lot of the fraud, the researchers also mentioned, we're not talking about televangelists spending tithe money on private jets. We're talking largely about people with no criminal record who make relatively little money, but they absolutely have an intimate knowledge of how the organization works. They know where all the bodies are buried. They know how much they could steal and get away with. And that's usually what we're talking about here, because that adds up over time. They escape scrutiny. And when you consider how many hundreds of thousands of small churches there are, all convincing members to hand over cash, many of which have very little oversight into that money after it's collected, the potential for fraud is definitely there. The question is whether church leaders are willing to do anything to prevent that kind of financial abuse. It's up to them. I'm going to pause there for a second to get to any questions here, Den. Of course, church leaders take money. They don't have to show their books to anyone. I know. It's one of the most frustrating things about the IRS, the fact that they treat churches and ministries with kid gloves. Like, it doesn't matter if they break the IRS rules. The IRS doesn't revoke their tax exempt status. If churches, specifically religious organizations, do not have to file the same paperwork as Planned Parenthood or even right-wing nonprofit groups. Why? Because they're religious, so they get a pass, which they absolutely do not deserve and shouldn't have. But that makes it a lot easier to commit financial fraud in the religious world because very few people are paying attention to the money, except the people who stand to benefit from it. They were the first numbers I saw. I hope. Oh, good. Oh, I got you. You're talking about the numbers I pulled up a second ago. Sorry, I'm not going to go back there right now, but I know you were not making up those numbers. I'd be curious if they could actually factor in coercion. Do you mean, Dan's backcountry? Do you mean coercion in terms of how people are giving money to their churches or something totally different? I don't know. I don't know how you can measure coercion if you're just trying when the information you have available is so opaque as it is. Trying to incorporate some of these variables that would have an impact, but I mean, it's hard enough to calculate this stuff as is. I don't know that you'd be able to get even more detailed, but I like that they're trying to study it. That's kind of nice. Okay, I'm going to get to a couple more stories here. Let me jump to this one. Give me 1 second to just pull up the right stuff. Here we go. Okay, I want to share this one with you. Okay, I'm skipping one story. We might get back to it if I want to in a little bit. This is a fascinating story out of India. And I know a lot of you commenters are like, you only talk about Christianity all the time and you never talk about what happens in other parts of the world. Well, let's talk about what happens in another part of the world. Because a few weeks ago, in late February, the Indian state of Assam, and I'm going to show you a map here so you know where I'm talking about. There's India, and right over there in red, that's the state of Assam. It's kind of away from the rest of the mainland country. That Indian state decided that they wanted to take action because a lot of Christian missionaries are coming into the country, usually Christian missionaries, and they promise things like miracle cures for all kinds of diseases. And you know how that works. They are taking advantage of these gullible people who desperately need medicine and hope. And they take advantage of them. And it's a horrible thing to do. And they just want to win converts. So these lawmakers in Assam wanted to put a stop to that. So they passed a bill. It's called the Assam Healing Prevention of Evil Practices Bill 2024. And I'm going to show you this bill because I want to read the preamble with you. Check this out. What's this bill all about? To bring social awakening in the society and to create healthy, science-based knowledge and safe social environment to protect human health against the evil and sinister practices thriving on ignorance and ill health of people, to eradicate the non-scientific healing practices with ulterior motives for exploiting the innocent people and thereby destroying the fiber of the public health of the society for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. I feel like that's missing a million commas and periods, but I will let that slide. But you get a sense of what they are saying here. They are saying, we want science and good health care, and we don't want these horrible people coming in and lying to our citizens and taking advantage of them and exploiting them by promising these cures that have no basis in reality. And that sounds very, very sensible. What this bill does is it bans anybody from performing magical healing to treat diseases or disorders because they say it gives people a false impression of how they can be cured. And it also promotes anybody from promoting those remedies as if they are legitimate. And I want to show you one other thing about this bill that is down here. It's only like 5 pages, but this is also, of course, at the moment, I want to share this with you. Oh, here we go. Look at the penalties that they are putting in for the people who do this. In the case of first offense, basically what they're saying is if you break this law and you promise people a miracle cure that never happens, we will give you a jail sentence between 1 to 3 years and fine you 50,000 rupees, which is like $600 in the United States for a first offense. Further offenses could result in a 5-year jail sentence and a fine of 1 lakh, which is about 100,000 rupees or 1,200 US dollars. So, like, they're taking this very seriously. And again, all this sounds kind of amazing because if the goal is to guide sick people toward actual evidence based medicine, then great, because this is about consumer protection more than anything else. In India, especially, there are so many people who flock toward folk medicine that offers no actual help. And instead, what they should be doing is seeking out doctors who actually know what they need. So, by turning to religion or other forms of superstition, not only are patients depriving themselves of remedies that could demonstrably help them, they're actually making it worse because the disease has more time to spread in some cases. Like, even worse, they could be duped by people who just want to take their money and have no interest in the patient's well-being. So here's the problem with the bill. The bill is so broadly written that this ban on magical healing sounds like it could apply to regular run-of-the-mill Christianity, including everything from Christians just praying for people to get better to, putting their hands on your shoulders in an attempt to have God run through the crowd and to you. And these are things like you can imagine in a lot of churches, if somebody is sick, the entire church will say, let's all pray for Barbara. She's sick. Let us all think about her and pray for her. Does that count as magical healing? Because what they're asking for is magic. It's not going to happen. It has no direct effect on Barbara. What if you're in church and you say you're sick and they say, well, you know what we can do? Let us all put our arms around you and ask God to heal you. Does that count as magical healing? Because even if I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt, they are not trying to steal anything. They're not trying to dupe you. They're not saying don't go see a doctor. They genuinely believe their prayers are going to help. They genuinely believe that by putting their hand on your shoulder, God is going to work through them and cure you. That's not how science works. It's not going to help. But again, I find that to be misguided, but definitely not criminal. And yet this bill, a lot of Christians are worried this bill is coming after them. The bill doesn't mention any religion, much less any particular religion, but a lot of religious people are frightened that that is exactly what this is about. And it doesn't help that political leaders in the state of Assam have kind of been open about the fact, like, yeah, we totally want to shut down Christianity. Here is one dude. This is from Christianity Today, which reported on this. And this is from the chief minister of Assam. We want to curb evangelism in Assam. So in that direction, the banning of healing will be a very, very important milestone. Like, dude, you're not supposed to say that out loud. Evangelism should not be a crime. It's wrong. I don't agree with it, but it shouldn't be criminal. And this guy goes on. Healing is a very, very dicey subject, which is used to convert tribal people. We are going to pilot this bill because we believe religious status quo is very important. Whoever is Muslim, let them be Muslim. Whoever is Christian, let them be Christians. Whoever is Hindu, let them be Hindus. So there can be a proper balance in our state, which is their way of saying, we're all for religious freedom here. We're not trying to impinge on anyone's religious freedom. We just don't want the magical healing, which is often used for bad reasons to convert people who are basically desperate in some way or another. And again, it would be a lot easier to believe if they weren't so blunt about the fact that they kind of want to eradicate Christianity. Here's how you know this is kind of what they're doing. In that state of Assam, the leading political party is the BJP party, which is also Narendra Modi's party. He's the prime minister of India. He is very much a Hindu nationalist. In the same way we talk about Christian nationalists in the United States, Narendra Modi is a Hindu nationalist in India. And his party very much wants to promote Hinduism at the expense of Islam and any other religion, including Christianity. And so when his party is running the show in the state of Assam, it's not far-fetched to think, yeah, they kind of want to punish Christians for being Christian. And like, I am all for shutting down faith healing that is hurting people. But again, let's not forget a lot of Christians genuinely pray for healing because they believe God will act on their request. It's not a con. They just happen to be misguided, but that's not a crime. So again, I kind of go back to these rhetorical, hypothetical questions, I should say. What happens if somebody is sick and their church collectively prays for them to get better? That is not anti-medicine. That is not anti-doctor. It does suggest God plays a role in healing. Should they be punished for it? Would it violate the law? I mean, it kind of sounds like it would violate this law. And in fact, this is also from the Christianity Today article. According to a Christian organization, they clarified, that Christian prayers for healing are acts of compassion, not conversion. According to the Christian Forum spokesman, leaders are concerned that any prayer that may follow healing could be perceived as a motive to convert the other person to Christianity, in which case everybody will go to jail. Like, they are worried about this, and I think they have good reason to be freaked out. By the way, it doesn't help that this bill also gives police officers the power to enter any church where there is suspicion of healing taking place and seize, that's their word, seize any evidence of noncompliance. Like, it's a backdoor approach to literal religious persecution. And I think I also have to mention that there are many sick people who don't always trust Western medicine or don't have the ability, financial or otherwise, to get the help they need. I mean, there are a lot of good reasons people may not trust Western medicine. If you're not familiar with the Tuskegee Institute, go look it up with what they did at Tuskegee. But like, there are reasons in people living in India, in that part of India, may not want to trust Western medicine. They also may not have the ability to see a doctor. In which case, if someone comes and says, I can heal you, let me help you, and you feel like you have no other choice, what are you going to do? Because sometimes, even if you can't get scientifically cured, having some spiritual hope that something's going to get better still makes you feel better. And I don't want to deprive people of that, as harmful as that could be, because it's not like they have a choice. So when they turn to these, this mystical cures out of hope or desperation, or in addition to actual medicine, I don't think it should be criminalized. And one Indian media outlet actually put it this way. They said, when it comes to these healing camps, missionaries often organize healing camps in remote areas, often far removed from the reach of adequate healthcare facilities. The promise of miracle cures for various ailments becomes a powerful lure for the impoverished villagers. And again, we can be mad at missionaries for setting up shop in a place where the most desperate people are living. But at the same time, if those desperate people feel like they have no other choice, so they go see these people, I don't know that should be banned when you're not giving these people access to the healthcare they actually need. You know what I mean? I don't want to say I am not on the side of these faith healers. I think they are taking advantage of people, but also a lot of them don't believe they're not in this for the con. They believe they're helping people. And I think when you start punishing that, now we're getting into the dodgy area of thought crime. And that's a scary, slippery slope right there. Like, let's criticize their ineffectiveness. But for people who don't feel like they have any choice, this could feel like a lifeline. If they're promising cures in exchange for conversion, let's punish that. But if they're praying because they think it'll help, if they're offering these miracle cures because they think it'll help, and they're not necessarily taking people's money in exchange for it, maybe we could say that's not scientific, but I find it hard to jump to the conclusion that what they're doing ought to be criminalized, and that those people deserve to go to jail. It seems like an overreach. Like, let's punish hucksters who use the language of faith to trick people into trusting them only to take their money and never fix the problems. But to punish well-meaning religious people who turn to God in the absence of alternatives or in addition to alternatives, that's messed up. Like Catholic hospitals, for example, they sometimes mix science and religion. And I would argue they are harmful in a lot of ways. But I don't think what they're doing is criminal. Plenty of missionaries, think faith healing is not a con. They genuinely believe it helps. And to punish their ignorance seems like a slippery slope. And I think it's also worth pointing out the BJP party, the Hindu Nationalist Party, they have suppressed religious freedom for non-Hindus across India. This is from a Catholic website called Crux. More Christians charged, harassed in India under anti-conversion laws. Like, that's not propaganda. That is what they are doing in India. This is another article from an Indian news outlet. Missionary schools in Assam on edge. Whoops. Missionary schools on edge after threat to remove Christian symbols, chapels. Like, they went into Christian schools in the state of Assam and removed Christian symbols. That seems like an overreach. By the way, Christians in Assam make up about 4% of the population. It's a religious minority in that state. If there's any silver lining to all of this, it's that the bill explicitly defines magic healing and evil practices as acts committed by those with a sinister motive to exploit common people. And that seems like bad, but they don't define who gets to say, like, who gets to say what's sinister? What's a sinister motive? How do we know something jumps to the level of exploitation? Because if you're not defining those, anyone could say anyone is sinister. So the lack of nuance does not help. By the way, there is a neighboring state in India. There's a neighboring state of that has a lot more Christians. And they pointed out, a Christian leader in that neighboring state pointed out that India's constitution specifically calls for religious freedom. This is in India's constitution, freedom of conscience and free profession, practice, and propagation of religion. Religious freedom is built into their constitution. So if that's what's going on, they're arguing that this neighboring state, this bill is actually violating the national law. It's not hard then to see this bill as a way to punish Christians under the guise of protecting citizens. I find it disturbing. As much as I don't like religious hucksters, I feel like this bill goes too far, and maybe those of you in the comments have different thoughts. I'd love to hear them too, but that's all I wanted to say about that one. I'll pause there for a bit. While Den is pulling up some other stuff, I'm just looking if there's anything else I really want to discuss. The answer may be no. I think I'm done for the night in terms of stories. But if they demand people be in their religion to get this or demand conversion, then it could be. Yeah, I agree. At that point, they are getting into this coerciveness behavior. But again, this goes back to, I could see them trying to criminalize that. But what happens when they're just saying, we're Christians and we're going to put our arms on you and cure you, and anyone's welcome to come? You don't have to convert, but you're welcome to. Like, at what point does it cross the line into doing something illegal? And this bill does not define it. It's very up for grabs, and that makes it very easy to go after religious minorities because you could just accuse them of doing that, even if it's not the intent. So again, like, I'm not trying to defend the Christian missionaries. I have a lot of problems with them. I definitely don't feel like I can support this bill, though, even though it's passed. This does sound like a slippery slope toward religious prosecution, persecution, and with slippery slopes, it makes you wonder what can be next. Yep, that is my fear. Exactly. You put it in very good words right there. They want to stomp out religious opposition, and we've seen that happening in India under Modi and his party. What they are doing to Muslims in that country is horrific. And it would not be far-fetched to think they would be doing the same thing to Christians, even though that's not a sizable part of the population. How does India feel about atheists? I wish I could answer that. I feel like, despite being brown, I don't feel like I have the knowledge, like the firsthand knowledge of it. They're probably decently received as opposed to like a place like Bangladesh where they have been persecuted. I don't really hear stories about India being about atheists being persecuted or punished in India for thought crimes. But again, I feel like Christians or Muslims have a lot more to fear in India than people who just don't believe in God. Cool. I think I'm going to pause there. My throat's, I think, done for the night. I want to just repeat a couple things. Thank you to Den for helping out with everything. Let me just say again, if you want to support this channel, go to patreon.com/Hemant. And the other thing I will mention for those of you still here, if you missed it earlier, on Monday morning, I'm doing a live stream with Jess Piper, who's going to talk with me about Senator Katie Britt and the Fundy baby voice that so many people have been talking about in the wake of her response to the State of the Union. I'm really looking forward to that conversation. And I will see you all next week. Have a wonderful weekend. Be safe.